PDF I just made, and you can download this from this video, or I'm going to leave a link to it somewhere in the video. Check the description for that. So this is how to see what your spouse's personality will be like. And I've given you 9 techniques here. The last one is theoretical. I've not tested, as in I've not tested it. Maybe someone else has. So the first thing we want to do is look at the 7th house and see the sign, the planets, the aspects, and the dispositor. So let me pull up right now. This is the chart of where I'm at in the exact time. So it's a great time to learn about yourself because you can see Mercury is in the sign of Virgo in the 1st house. So that the 1st house is perfect for Mercury, and you add Virgo. That's amazing. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is a good time for you to learn about yourself and your spouse, because you should know that going into this video that you can potentially learn something really good here. So look at the 7th house. This first box here is your birth chart. So look at the 7th house. You can see the 7th house has the sign of, it has the number 12, which is the sign of Pisces. So what we want to do is look at, because there's no planet here, we want to look at Jupiter, because Jupiter rules Pisces. And yeah, we're not using Uranus. Okay, some of you might, Western astrologers might think to use Uranus, but we're not using that here. Jupiter rules it in the traditional sense, so that's how we're using it. So we look to Jupiter, and we see Jupiter's in the 4th house with K2 in the sign of Sagittarius. This means anyone's spouse born at this time would be extremely spiritual. They would like religions such as Buddhism, Taoism, Confucius, all those types of detachment religions because of K2. And this would give such a great spiritual knowledge to the person. So if your spouse is born at this time, that is some of the traits they take on. Any trait of K2, so a little bit of a detached personality. Any trait of Jupiter, so optimism as well. So that's why they can teach these detachment religions if they wanted to. And that's the number one thing we do to check the spouse. So the first step, as I showed you there, was to look at the 7th house. Now, what's the next thing we want to do? Make the descendant the ascendant. Okay, and if I wanted to go a little more in depth on the 7th house here, sure, I could do that. But I'm just going to, for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it pretty brief. So now to make the ascendant the descendant is the 1st house, the descendant is the 7th house. The first thing you want to do is use whatever software you're using, change AM to PM. That will get you pretty close. And then you either have to go forward. So you might go 10 a.m. instead of, 10 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. That didn't work. That put Taurus as the ascendant, so it could be the opposite. So then we check 8 p.m. And you'll have to play with this. It'll be an hour or 2 hours difference. So there we go. Now we have Pisces as the ascendant. So now we've got a whole second chart here as the opposite of your chart because it's the descendant. But what that represents is your spouse. So from this whole chart, we can see things like the spouse will love family because we've got Venus in the 5th house there, especially for a man, but even for man or woman. We could say that she'll be extremely intelligent because now Mercury becomes the descendant. It goes into the 7th house, and it's with the sign of Virgo, so the spouse will be very intelligent. You can see they have a very mature network circle. They make a lot of assets over time. They build wealth over time. They love communication, business because of the moon. And their career might be focused on something spiritual. So we can see all these things from making the descendant the ascendant, and that really lets you go more in depth. So I would highly recommend you follow that step as well, and follow all these steps. But this to me is the second step when you're looking at the spouse. Then you want to look at the dot makarka. Okay, and what the dot makarka is the lowest degree planet. Now the highest degree planet shows your soul's path and what you need to accomplish. So in this case, the highest degree planet would either be the sun or Jupiter. But in our case, I think the sun might be a little bit higher degrees here. slightly. But what we want to look at is the descendant, the dot Makarka, the lowest degree planet, which is Saturn here. So Saturn, and some of you are looking and saying Rahu or Ketu, but we don't use shadow planets for this technique. Okay, so Saturn becomes the dot Makarka. Then we look at the position of Saturn from both the birth chart and the ascendant. Okay, so both the birth chart and the descendant. The descendant chart here has Saturn in the 11th house. So we can see that the spouse will love to network, and the spouse will only keep a few friends. The spouse will have very mature friends. Everything that goes along with Saturn in the 11th house, the spouse will take on those traits. Now, because we're only using one planet here, we can look just entirely at the significance of the planet itself. So we can say the spouse will be a little bit older. The spouse will be more mature. The spouse will be potentially a little bit lethargic or very hardworking. They've gone through both in their life. So any traits of Saturn, very disciplined, organized, the spouse will take on all those traits if they're born at this time. If we go back for a second to the birth chart, which I believe was 9, then we can see Saturn will be in the 5th house instead of the 11th. So in that case, the spouse would probably have had some problems in high school, but then they would love to get fame. They would love to spend time with their children. They'd love to build a family. And Saturn would also put a lot of discipline towards these things. So I say love because we're looking at just one planet. But if we're looking at just Saturn itself, obviously Saturn puts a lot of discipline on those things. So the person may also have some troubles in those areas of family, aunts and uncles and grandparents, as well as taking care of their family, because Saturn will put a lot of discipline into those things. So looking at what I just did there, making the dot Makarka the ascendant is also a possibility here. And I know I'm skipping to the 9th step. Some of you are not going to like that, but that's I think it's worth mentioning here because we've been looking at the dot Makarka here. So if we try to make it the ascendant for a minute, this is a theoretical technique, but I believe this is having some success as well. So I got to find the dot Makarka. This might be it. Nope. Just give me 1 sec. I'm trying to put the dot Makarka in the ascendant. And sometimes you have to play around with this. Sometimes you have to play around with the times in order to get the right planet in the ascendant. So there we go. Now Saturn's in the 1st house. And what we can say from this chart is that the person will love the spouse. The person will love you. So if your spouse will love you. We can also see a yoga here forming. Anything you know about astrology, go in depth with astrology, and you'll learn so much from every one of these charts. And you might be asking, well, which is it? Because there's so many techniques here. And the easiest way to put this is use these steps, okay? Use these steps here. Look at the 7th house. That's number 1. That's going to be 75% of your spouse. Then make the descendant the ascendant. That will work in about 10%. Then check the dot Makarka. That's another 10%. Now, what we need to do is look at Venus, look at Jupiter, and Mars. So if you're a male and you're looking for a female, you only need to look at Venus. So let's go back to the actual birth time here. Whoops, that would be AM. So looking at the actual birth time here, we can just look at Venus. Some people will look at Venus. I made this the 4th step. Some people will do this as the 1st step. Some people do this as the 2nd step. So this is just as important as the other techniques I've shown you, if not more. So you want to look at Venus. It's in the sign of Cancer because of the number 4, and which means it's also receiving trine. If you use trine, some Vedic astrologers don't, but I definitely see that working. So it's got the moon and Venus are together, which means there's going to be a very harmonious and nurturing relationship with the spouse, because the moon represents nurturing. The moon is the mother. The moon represents everything to do with care. So when we put that with Venus, you can see that there's going to be a very good relationship with the spouse, if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for a CEO type personality, then this may not be, you may be disappointed if you're born at this time. But this is another technique we can use, looking at Venus, and obviously looking at the dispositor too. So when I say to look at Venus, you also have to look at the sign Venus is in. And so if going back to Venus, looking at the house here is the 11th house. So you will most likely meet the spouse through networking. And the spouse is going to be very interested in networking. The spouse will make a lot of money. So anything to do with Venus in the 11th house, you could say the spouse takes on those traits. Again, it's about, this one is actually probably about 15% or 25% effect compared to, it's pretty much even with the 7th house. So looking at Venus is super important for male or female. Then if you're a female, you also want, if you're looking for a female, looking for a male, you also want to look at Mars. Or if you're male looking for a male, you want to look at Mars. That's in the 8th house. So the sort of aggressive type of male that you'd find is going to be interested in anything to do with the 8th house. You know, death, sex, occult. So someone looking for a very much manly man would look to Mars. And this is the kind of traits you're going to get out of them in this lifetime, if that's what you were looking for. Then if you look at Jupiter, Jupiter is more likely to be the spouse than Mars. Jupiter does represent the spouse for female. And actually, once you marry, really Jupiter becomes the spouse. Unless Jupiter is with Mars, then you get that sort of manly man also with the nice spouse. So that's the only way that you get both those traits. But usually females or males, when looking for a male spouse, or when looking for a boyfriend, basically, you end up finding the types that are more aggressive or the types that are more suitable to sit down with and settle down. So Jupiter becomes the settled down person and Mars becomes the aggressive. So when you put those two together, that's the only case where you get both the bad boy and the good boy in one. But otherwise, you want to look to Jupiter for marriage. So again, this partner will have detached traits, just like we can see from the 7th house. So that's another indicator here. If you're looking for a male, that's another indicator that the person will be having a spiritual career, very detached, very much loving Buddhism, Taoism, Taoism, Confucius, all those K2 religions. And so let's look at the next technique. I could go more in depth on this. There's a lot more to say about Jupiter and K2, but for the sake of keeping this video simple, let's just go to the next technique. Then we want to assess the D9 chart. Okay. So the D9 chart right here, as we can see, this person has Mars and Moon in the 10th house, the D9 chart. So to people from the outside, the marriage will seem very much passionate, will seem like there's a ton of passion, as there will be, because they aspect the 4th house. And if we look at the 4th house, you can see this is how you feel about the marriage. And you've got the sign of Scorpio there, which the dispositor, which the ruler is Mars. So based on that, you can see this exchange between the 4th and 10th house. There's a lot of passion in this relationship, and steady passion too, considering the sign of Taurus. So this is a pretty amazing relationship, if you ask me. But definitely looking at the D9 chart is important. D9 chart has at least a 10% effect on the relationship. Again, I don't know the exact percentages because you do have to look at all these techniques. Just understand that the birth chart is number one. And then every time we get a little bit further down this list, the techniques have a little bit less effect. But all the way till number 5, these are super important. Every one of these to number 5 has at least 10% or more effect. So 5, 4, 3, 2. And then obviously the first technique, looking at the 7th house, has the most effect. One thing I just realized that I didn't put into this chart, but if you're watching this video, you get to see this. When we look at the D9 chart, we're also looking at the 9th house. So maybe I'll update this PDF. Maybe I'll just leave this a secret for this video. But we also need to look at the 9th house for marriage. So in the 9th house of the birth chart, this is what we're dividing up for the D9. But in the 9th house, the birth chart shows what the marriage will be like. So this person will get a lot of stability in their life when they marry, because you can see the moon is in the 9th house in a good sign in Taurus. So when this person marries, or when they find a long-term relationship, they really get a lot of mental balance. Okay. So now moving on to these techniques, this has much less of effect. This is 5% or less. We can look at the moon chart and the 7th house from the moon. So let's take a look at that. Again, you have to play around with the times a bit to get the right planet into the first house. So we're trying to get the moon into the first house. Almost got it. Whoops. So now we've got the moon in the first house here. And then from here, we can see the 7th house, the descendant. The descendant will be Mars. So we look, and Mars becomes in the 12th house here. So it's possible that this person will meet their spouse in a faraway land, which you wouldn't have known unless you looked at the moon chart. So that's why it's still important to use these extra techniques. And I would say there's at least 50% chance this person would meet their spouse in a foreign land, somewhere overseas. So using these techniques do matter. These techniques do matter. Every one of them you use starts to show more of the picture of what's going on. And again, there's this theme of 12th house. So 12th house is showing a spiritual nature, which we found through K2 and Jupiter before. So themes start to rise when you look at a chart from different angles. And the theme here is a spiritual nature to this spouse. I'm not going to go too much more in depth on this moon chart because, like I said, it's got about 5% effect. But when you see something so dramatic like the 7th lord being in the 12th house, something like that can indicate a spouse from a foreign land. So that's why it's still important to look at these techniques in case you find something dramatic. Okay, so then optionally here as the 7th step, optionally we can make the moon, the sun, the north node, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, all these planets. If we wanted to play around with the time, we could make them the ascendant and we could look from there. So it's in this order: the moon, then the sun. The sun would show the spouse's ego, their personality a little bit. The moon shows most of how they feel about themselves. The north node chart, you could definitely look at that and see a bit more about the 7th house there. You could look at Venus. That's a really good one. Mars and Jupiter as well. So then another technique I want to show you here is the D7 chart. Let's quickly look at that. If you're using Jagannatha, I can't really say that name, I apologize. Then you can come here, you can right click on any of these charts and you can pull up a different chart. So the D7 is right here. And this will give us a little bit more information about the spouse. It's not a ton more because this is also a business chart, but it'll give us a bit more information. So when I'm looking at the D7 for spouse, because there's only about 5% effect here, I'm really only looking at the 1st and 7th house and maybe the 4th and 10th, but I'm really looking at the 1st and 7th house here because that's going to have the most effect. If we start getting outside of the 1st and 7th house, like if we went to the 2nd house here, now we're looking in less than 1% effect of the spouse. So really just stick to the 1st and 7th as much as possible. So this person has Mercury and this person has Jupiter in the ascendant of the D7. So what does that tell us about the person? Highly intelligent, and again, spiritual nature from Jupiter, likes to teach. So you see the theme building here, and you see it from different angles. So that's why it's important to look at these techniques. And as you start to learn about astrology, you'll start to see that there's so much synergy that starts to happen as you look at different houses, different charts. All of it starts to mesh together really nicely. And then again, okay, so the last step here was the D7, putting the dot Makarka as the ascendant, which we already covered. So these are the techniques I wanted to show you today. Please leave some feedback and let me know if you'd like to see some more techniques. There's always potentially more, but these are the ones you need to really understand your spouse. Okay. Aside from that, the only other thing I could tell you to do is get your spouse's chart as well, so you can understand more about her once you have found her. So I hope this is helpful, and please like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.